Hallelujah. Bishop. Yahushua HaMashiach. Hallelujah. Abba, I come before you once again, bowing the knees of my heart, beseeching you to please give ear to my prayer. Abba, I thank you for your grace, for your mercy, for your compassion. And you know, as well as I know, how much I need them. Abba, please forgive me. I come before you acknowledging once again being an unworthy man. You know what I go through. Please forgive me for disrespectfulness, for pridefulness, selfishness, for doubtfulness, for lustfulness. Please forgive me for dissatisfaction. Please forgive me for negativity. Please forgive me for all these things that I've done that are contrary to your word. I thank you for your forgiveness because I need your forgiveness. And I pray that you cleanse me by the blood of Yahushua HaMashiach of my sin, of my iniquity. That I am worthy to stand before you at this time. That I am worthy to even speak your word according to your will. That I am worthy to stand before your people to represent you, Abba. Because I am an unworthy man. Nevertheless, for your loving kindness that you bestow upon me, which I thank you for. You open my heart, you open my mind, and you help me to see, Abba. I thank you for the blessing of life, although sometimes I take it for granted, and I again pray that you forgive me for taking my life for granted. Forgive me for the anger that swells up within me when life deals me harsh blows and difficulties. I tend to forget about you and only focus on myself and my problems, and I pray that you forgive me for that, and I ask you in the name of Yahushua HaMashiach to help me become better with that. Help me to overcome the ruminating over past incidents which I cannot change. Nevertheless, I keep going over these things and it brings me down and it separates me from you. I pray that you forgive me for that, Abba. Abba, I thank you for my health, my strength, having a sound mind. I thank you for the health, strength, and sound minds of my children, my grandchildren, my brothers and sisters of Beth Yahweh camp. Abba, I thank you for the strength that you do provide for each and every one of us to overcome and to get through the obstacles that we face from day to day. Those events that hinder us in our walk with you. The fact that we are still here, Abba. The fact that we are still pushing forward, Abba. The fact that we have not turned away from you completely, Abba. It is by your strength and by your might through the Spirit that you have provided for us. And for that, I thank you, Abba. I pray that you continue to strengthen us by your Spirit, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, that we may all continue in your word as your students, learning at the feet of Yahushua HaMashiach, that we may know your truth and that your truth may set us free. Abba, I pray that you uplift our hearts and our minds this day, that we may receive of your spirit, your knowledge, your understanding, your wisdom, that we may grow in grace, mercy, and compassion one toward another, that we may grow to become strong pillars upholding your word, that we may grow to become strong warriors defending your word, that we may grow to become lights in a darkened world. Abba, as we continue our study in Wayikra, lead, God, by your Spirit. Help us to understand why you have commanded these observances, Abba. And if there be anyone who is suffering in whatever means, I pray that you help us to overcome and receive the healing that we need to recover. I ask these things, Abba. Beshim Rebbe Melech Yahushua HaMashiach. Hallelujah. Welcome once again to Ku Alahim Presents Bina TORAH, Understanding Torah. And we are continuing our study in Wayikra, which is Leviticus. And we're going to start looking at an overview for the plan of salvation prior to getting into today's lesson. So, without further ado, because we have a few things we want to touch on, we start out with the layout. Okay, and by the layout, what we come to understand, as we have here, the setting of the Sabbath allots humanity 7 days for Abba to accomplish his will. Now, excuse me, we have yet to really get into other details of what the Sabbath points to, which we will be getting there. We only touched on a few things, and we're going to, as we move along, we're going to get into a few other things as it pertains to the Sabbath. But in Shemot, which is Exodus chapter 20 and verse 9, we are taught, 6 days shall you labor and do all your work. When this is said, this is allotting humanity. You can look at the entire 7-day process as the age of humanity. But 6 days in particular have been given to humanity to do things according to our will. And if we look at the world today, we see exactly where that is getting us. Okay? And I'm talking across the board. And when it comes to obeying the word that Abba has prescribed for humanity, albeit it was through Israel or Israel, it was intended to be for humanity. But when we look at the world at large, we see that there is no righteous government across the board. None. There's none. Okay? But you have small fractions of people scattered throughout the world who are striving to live according to the will of Yah. Very few. Okay? So throughout the 7-day period, 6 days have been allotted, as we are taught. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work. And in Bereshit, which is Genesis chapter 2 and verse 2, it says, on the 7th day, Elohim finished his work which he had done. Meaning, when the 7th day arrives, the Most High is going to complete the work that has been started since the creation of humanity. Okay? And keep these things in mind. And what we want to recall, and we touched on this briefly, there is still a work that needs to be accomplished on the seventh day. This in no way, shape, or form is permitting us to have excuse me have secular work going on when it comes to observing the Sabbath day. For example, today is the Sabbath day. And if you are a Sabbath keeper in obedience to Abba's word, you should not be doing anything other than separating yourself to him. Okay? So I'm going to emphasize that. But I also have to tie into that the working that the Most High is going to be doing when we get to the seventh day in this plan of salvation. All right? So, continuing. Sorry about that. I don't know. Well, for some reason, I just started to get congested. Crazy. After that layout, we talked about the sacrifice. Okay? Now, this was the plan devised to free creation from the bondage of sin and death. And by creation, everything that Yahweh Elohim made became subjected to sin and death. Okay? So, we have here in Chazon, which is Revelation chapter 13 and verse 8, it says, "And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him," talking about the beast, "whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world." When it says the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world, what the implication is that it was always intended for Yahweh Elohim to deliver humanity by this means. Okay? Abba willing, at some other time, we will get into a teaching describing or explaining exactly what that entailed. Okay? And why it was set up this way. Because there is a reason. All right? So, the next passage in Romans chapter 8, verses 18 through 22. "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which will be revealed toward us. For the creation waits with eager expectation for the children of Elohim to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to vanity, not of its own will, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of decay into the liberty of the glory of the children of Elohim. For we know that the whole creation groans and travails in pain together until now." Okay, so when it comes once again to the sacrifice, that sacrifice was offered on Pesach or Passover, where Mashiach Yahusha, he became that Passover lamb who laid down his life so that death passes over us, who put the blood on the two side posts and on the lintel of that door. Okay? Keep these things in mind. Abba, in his revelation, is very concrete so that we have a visualization of exactly what he's doing. Keep these things in mind. Okay? Next, we have our new life. All right? Throughout the 7 days. Now, what this is a reference to, of course, Chag HaMatzah, or the Feast of Unleavened Bread. which is a 7-day festival. Throughout the 7 days, humanity should live with sincerity and truth. Okay? Now, even though, as we see, 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, what Abba wants to see, within that time frame, how many of us will choose to live according to his will, opposed to our own? All right? So, we have in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, starting at verse 7. Purge out the old yeast, that you may be a new lump, even as you are unleavened. For indeed, Messiah, our Passover, has been sacrificed in our place. Therefore, let's keep the feast, not with old yeast, neither with the yeast of malice and wickedness. So there are 2 options, as we've discussed before. We will either live, as it says here, with malice and wickedness, which would then categorize us as being the seed of the serpent. Or, as it says, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So if we choose to live with sincerity and truth, that is when we are categorized as the seed of Elohim. Everything is connected within Abba's word. There's one thought. Even though he used several people to reveal his word, by that one spirit, there's one thought, there's one message that's being conveyed. And it's all founded on love. Contrary to what you may have heard. Okay? But let's move on. Next we have the offering, which is Reshit Omer, right? First fruit of the Omer. Now, this represents, as we see here, the sacrifice being presented as first fruit from the dead. Okay? Because remember, Mashiach Yahushua died and shed his blood in our place, because the wages of sin is death. So he took that. All we need to do is accept that sacrifice as being in our place. But at some point, that sacrifice had to be presented. So what he did, he incorporated the offering. Now what we find here in Acts chapter 26, verses 21 through 23. It was because of these things that the Yahudim seized me in the temple and tried to kill me. However, I have had Elohim's help. So to this day, I stand testifying to both small and great, saying nothing but what both the prophets and Moshe said would happen. That the Messiah would die, and that he, as the first to rise from the dead, would proclaim light to both the people and the Gentiles. Okay? And then we have in Yochanan, which is John chapter 16, verse 7, and we're going to use this passage as a segue into our next high holy day, where Mashiach Yahushua, he says this, nevertheless, I tell you the truth. It is to your advantage that I go away. For if I don't go away, the counselor won't come to you. But if I go, I will send him to you. In other versions, it says it is expedient that I go away. Because it's through my going away that the Comforter will be sent. The Comforter is that counselor. And we're going to get right into that. And I want y'all to keep that in mind as we start talking about weeks, or as it's referred to in Ivri, Shavuot. Okay? Shavuot. And what this represents in the plan of salvation, the early harvest. Because remember, when we talked about this offering here, first fruits, what the Most High just did, He has now incorporated the agricultural season with the observance of the high holy days. That's what He just did. And it's for a reason. He gave us the agricultural season to teach us and give us a picture of salvation. Because that's exactly what we're talking about. The plan of salvation. Which it is important, we go back, we touched on this, it is important that we observe these festivals according to the natural clock that He has given in the luminaries, the sun, the moon, and the stars. And when I hear people say, well, we don't keep the lunar calendar, we keep the solar calendar, or we don't keep the solar calendar, we keep the lunar calendar. There is no such thing. There's one calendar. And that calendar is based on the movement of the sun, the moon, and the stars collectively. We don't observe one versus the other. They all go hand in hand. But the problem is that people are not allowing Abba by His chosen vessels to teach us how to observe the luminaries and observe His holy days according to His will. Everybody wants to do things based on their personal understanding, and that is why you have such disarray, even among those proclaiming to be Hebrews, Israelites, and Jews. It's the reality. I'm willing, though, for them who have a willful heart, those who hunger, those who thirst for Abba's righteousness, not self-righteousness, but the righteousness of Torah. By His Spirit, He's going to connect us all. Let's move on. So we're in Vayikra, which is Leviticus chapter 23. Now, one of the things that was mentioned previously, in regard to the high holy days or the appointed times being based on the phases of the moon. Well, first exhibit we had was the Sabbath day. The Sabbath and the observance of the Sabbath, or the establishing of the Sabbath, was not contingent on the luminaries. Abba established it by His will, through His word. Okay? But now, when we get to Shavuot, or the Feast of Weeks, we have an example of a high holy day that is not based on the phases of the moon. And we're going to see why. And this is one of the fail-safes that Abba has placed in His word to ensure that His people keep things according to His divine will. So Leviticus chapter 23, starting verse 9. Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the sons of Israel and tell them, when you have come into the land, and I'm going to touch on this again. I know we mentioned it before. I just want to reiterate. When he says this in no way, shape, or form is implying that we are only supposed to keep the high holy days in the land of Israel. That is not what he's saying. He said it this way because, remember, at the time, Israel is wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. They were not growing vegetation. They were being fed by manna. If they requested meat, He sent them quail. If they wanted something to drink, He brought forth water. That is how Israel survived for 40 years. But once you get into this land that I have promised you, and you're able to settle down, and you can start growing vegetation, That's when you start practicing these observances. That's the point being made. And I want to emphasize and reiterate that because you have some people out here misleading people, lying to people, deceiving people, having them believe you're not supposed to keep these observances in the land of your captivity. That's a lie. Pesach, Chag HaMatzah, was given while they were in the land of their captivity. Food for thought. But let's move on. Verse 10. Speak to the sons of Israel and tell them, when you have come into the land which I give to you, and shall reap its harvest, then you shall bring the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. This is Reshit Omer. And he shall wave the sheaf before Yahweh to be accepted for you. On the next day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. I need to emphasize a point here. When he says the Sabbath, this is a reference to the seventh day or the weekly Sabbath. You have some who have affixed the observance of Shavuot to Sivan the 6th. That is not what Abba intended. It's not. If that was the case, he would have gave us the date just like he did with Abib the 14th, with Abib the 15th, and once we get into the 7th month, he did the same thing there. It was not his intention for us to affix this date. And for those who are observing Shavuot on this affixed date, you are misled. And for those who teach it, you are misleading the people. That is not what Abba's intention was. This is the weekly Sabbath. All you need to do, run a reference on the word in Hebrew or Hebrew, HaShabbat, and what you will find every time that term is used, it is in connection with the weekly Sabbath. It does not entail any 7-day period. It's the weekly Sabbath particularly. So let's go back for a moment. With the combination of the 14th of Abib, which is Passover, and the 7-day observance of unleavened bread, starting on the 15th of Abib, we have an 8-day period. We're going to call that 8-day period either Passover season or the season of unleavened bread, right? Because, let's go back to the layout. Because the layout is a 7-day period, within that 8 days, one of those days is going to be a Sabbath day, a weekly Sabbath. That weekly Sabbath that falls within the 8 days of the Passover season or unleavened bread is the Sabbath that now marks the beginning of this count. So that Sabbath, right, as he says here, on the next day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. This is on the first day of the week, which we observe Reshit Omer on, right? Now, being the first day of the week, it kicks off another 7-day process. Keep that in mind. All right? Now, let's take your mind back to something else we touched on. When it comes to being a lunar Sabbatarian, and you're keeping the Sabbath day based on the phases of the moon, it is impossible to number 7 Sabbaths and then tomorrow after that 7th Sabbath be the 50th day. It is impossible. Now, if you can recall, then you may have to go back to the archives and maybe look that up, or maybe some of you took notes on it. There were 2 calendars that were given, right, as far as the lunar Sabbatarians. The one calendar is separated the new moon, then you had verses 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right, as and the 8th day would have been the 7th day. Or they just acknowledge the first day of the new moon as being the first day, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay? Why that is problematic in keeping this is because you have extra days. A month is not exactly 28 days long. The moon shows its light for 28 days, but there's also a day and a half, a 36-hour period where you don't see the moon, which is why when it comes to Hebrew months, they're either going to be 29 days or 30 days. You cannot keep Shavuot according to Abba's instructions, counting 7 Sabbaths and the morrow after the 7th Sabbath being the 50th day because of those extra days. This is the fail-safe that Allah put into his word to ensure that we observe the Sabbath according to his will. Because as was mentioned, the Sabbath is not based on the luminaries. The Sabbath is based on, thus saith Yahweh. Period. End of story. If you have an issue with that, your issue is not with me. Take it up with Abba. It is his word that established it. See? Remember. That's the time that he chose to stop doing something. The time that he chose to cease and desist. Right? The time that he chose to bless. The time that he chose to sanctify. See? That is how the Sabbath day was established. Not because of the phases of the moon. It's because of something that was done particularly in that day. And when he gives that command, which we're going to see, not today but later on, he gives that command and he tells us to do it because this is the day that Yahweh rested from all his work. That is the standard. Anything outside of that is a lie. So when it comes to, once again, lunar Sabbatarians, Shavuot was placed here as a fail-safe because Abba knows how that old serpent thinks. He already laid out exactly what he was going to do. We just need to follow the manuscript. Simple as that. But let's move on. Let's get back to Leviticus chapter 23. So we're currently in Reshit Omer, the first fruit of the Omer, right? So verse 12. On the day when you wave the sheaf, you shall offer a male lamb without defect, a year old, for a burnt offering to Yahweh. The meal offering with it shall be 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mingled with oil, an offering made by fire to Yahweh for a pleasant aroma. And the drink offering with it shall be of wine, the 4th part of an hin. You must not eat bread or roasted grain or fresh grain until this same day, until you have brought the offering of your Elohim. This is a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. Now, listen to this. And you shall count unto you from the morrow after Ha-Shabbat, the Sabbath. Now, remember, we are on Reshit Omer, which is the first day of the week. From the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. So if this is the first day of the week, he said, now you go through that whole 7-day period and you end up on what? The Sabbath, which is the 7th day. So he's telling us to count 7 weeks. This is what he means. There is a teaching circulating out here, once again, for those people who are following these deceivers who have you believing that it's supposed to be 100 days. They are lying to you. They are misleading you. And Abba has not sent them, period. Don't take my word for it. With humility, with sincerity, if you desire to do what is right in the eyes of the Most High, you ask the Creator yourself. But again, it has to be with humility and it has to be with sincerity. Abba will see that. He'll look into your heart. And if you are in the right place, he will lead and guide you to the truth. Okay? That's why we say don't take our word for it. It is Abba's word. He will lead, he will guide, and he will bring you exactly to what you're being told right now. These people out here, they are false teachers, they are false prophets, and they are misleading Israel. As Mashiach Yahushua once said, the blind leading the blind. So he says again, verse 15, and you shall count unto you from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. So let's do this. If we take simple mathematics, right? We haven't been to school. I'm not going to write all this up here, but I'm just going to do it like this. Remember that. 7 times 7 equals 49. See? That's why, let's backtrack just for a brief moment. See, lunar Sabbatarians, you can't do that because of the extra days in a month. You can't do it. So what you have to do, you have to devise some type of way to explain away the additional days. See? You have to twist it a little bit. And that's unnecessary if we simply follow Abba's instructions. But I want to interject something right here. In Acts chapter 2, verse 1, this is the very same observance, right? But here it's called something different. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. Now you look up this word, number 4005, our first term here, Pentecost. It simply means 50th. And we're going to see why. Because after you count those 7 Sabbaths, guess what he's going to say? He's going to say the day after that 7th Sabbath, that's going to be Shavuot or Pentecost. And it's called Pentecost. You know why? Because it's the 50th day. Not the 100th day. It's the 50th day. And there's so many other things that we can say to substantiate that. But let's just keep it simple. It's the 50th day. Now, here's another point in regard to Sunday worship. There's a saying, right? How a broken clock is right twice a day, right? So let's just say it's 12 o'clock. The clock broke and it's at 12 o'clock. Well, you're going to have 12 o'clock, what they refer to as the afternoon, or you're going to have 12 o'clock, which is going to be in the middle of the night, right? Okay. Well, let me say this. Of all the observances that Abba has commanded in Leviticus chapter 23, Pentecost is the only one that Christians get right. And it's not even based on what I just mentioned, the broken clock theory. It's based on the acknowledgement of counting 7 Sabbaths and the morrow after the 7th Sabbath being Pentecost. But what's interesting and why I'm interjecting that is this. If the Christians know that you're supposed to count 7 Sabbaths and the morrow after the 7th Sabbath is Pentecost, simultaneously you are acknowledging that day before as being the Sabbath day. You're acknowledging the 7 weeks before as being 7 consecutive Sabbaths. And what's the point in mentioning that? This is the point. If Sunday is the quote-unquote new Sabbath day, shouldn't you be counting 7 Sundays? And then the morrow after the 7th Sunday, which would be on a Monday? Shouldn't all Pentecost observance be on a Monday and not on the first day of the week? Think about it. Even in their observance of Pentecost, they acknowledge what the true Sabbath is, yet they don't keep the true Sabbath. Think about that. But let's move on. Verse 16. Even unto the morrow after the 7th Sabbath. You got 7 Sabbaths, that's 49. So the day after the 49th Sabbath, guess what that is? 50th. That's the 50th day. Even until the morrow after the 7th Sabbath shall you number 50 days. I'm apologetic for screaming, yelling, or however you want to word it. But sometimes Albert gets frustrated by our stupidity. He said it clear, cut, and dry in his word. How are you going to go outside of what he said clearly? He said it clearly. Where do you get these ideas from? So now what you got to twist the word.